Right. I want to open your eyes and your minds now, because you think we're facing enormous challenges on the planet, as we've heard from so many, including the next generation, saying we're running out of time. But what about how space, outer space, which isn't that far away, can help us? When I was asked to chair this, I thought, is this really serious, how outer space can impact sustainability on our planet? What I'm discovering, and what you're going to hear for the next half hour, is extraordinary about how valuable and how important space is. First of all, I'm going to get each of the three guests to introduce themselves so you know what they do relevant to outer space. We have, first of all, the Director General of the UAE Space Agency.
Thank you, Nick. It's a pleasure to be here, and I would like to take this opportunity to give you an overview, quick overview of what is UAE Space Agency. It's the first space agency in the region. It was formed in 2014, mandated by UAE government to build capacity in space, but also to support R&D and also international cooperation. What we do today, we have a small team of 50 people. UAE space sector considered to be the largest in the region. We have 10 satellites in orbit. We have 8 satellites in project. Around $6 billion has been invested in space. We have around 3,000 people who are working in the space sector in the UAE. We have more than 50 companies that are based here in UAE. UAE has become a hub for space activity, for space education, and space events. We have a mission to Mars. It's going to be launched this year.
Tell me more about that later.
Yes, it's a very exciting project. It's a flagship for our country and even for the region. We have an astronaut program. Our first astronaut, Hazza Al-Mansouri, went to space last September. And also we have a number of initiatives, especially on the Arab level. We have an initiative that probably I will be more than happy to give more details on that.
Dr. Ahbabi, thank you very much indeed. Now, I want to hear more detail about why that's important to sustainability. Niklas Hedman from the United Nations.
Yes, thank you for...
Take the microphone a little closer to your mouth.
Okay, so thank you for inviting me. Yes, I'm Niklas Hedman. I work for something called the United Nations Office for Outer Space Affairs. And we work very closely with a unique intergovernmental platform in the UN system, the Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space, with 95 states members. We are here in this Sustainability Summit focusing on sustainability on Earth. And this is where space is a vital tool, sustainability from space. I want to pick up also sustainability in space, meaning how do we secure the safety, security, sustainability of space operations? How do we tackle space debris dilemma? How do we go into address the proliferation of satellite launchings into space with the coming mega constellations in the future? We need capacity building, we need to work in a dialogue with private sector, and we need to consensus build around measures to curb space debris and hazards from outer space activities.
Niklas, for the moment, thank you. Laurence Monnoyer-Smith from Paris.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me in this panel. So I have actually recently joined the French Special Agency. So it's called the CNES, Centre National d'Études Spatiales. And well, the CNES has been existing for 50 years. It's a major tool for French diplomacy to ensure French access to space, and of course within the European context right now. I'm coming from the French Ministry of Environment, where I've been working for 4 years. I've been working with Ségolène Royal during the COP21, and this is actually quite linked with the, I am now in CNES because it's quite linked with the strategy of the French strategy of including more and more environmental and climate change initiatives and innovation within the space community.
Right. Help us understand from your perspective in Paris, under the personal direction of President Macron, why space is so important on sustainability, why up in space it's helping us here on the planet with these enormous challenges we've been hearing about over the last 36 hours.
Yeah, that's right. I'm not sure that every people realize that actually if space is very much about exploration, about getting knowledge out of, interstellar traveling and journey, it's also very much linked with the observation of Earth. It's interesting to know that Bill Anders, one of our main astronauts from mission Apollo 8, has stated, and it's very true, that by going, he was saying that we went in space to discover the moon, and what we discovered instead was planet Earth. Why? It's because most of our activities, if I put aside our defense or military activities in special agencies, is very much linked with Earth observation. And many of the information, data, and research we're doing within the climate change context and linked with environment is very dependent on the data we can gather from Earth.
So you're saying we know much more about our planet simply because of what's being produced up there?
Exactly. More than half of the insensible climate variables that have been determined within the UNFCCC context by the scientists are only observable from the satellites with remote sensing instruments. So we need this information. It is one of our main activity and international collaboration that we do with other space agencies. So basically, sustainability, Earth observation, and all the scientific research that scholars do at the international level is enabled thanks to all the those information.
And just before I go to Niklas, I mean, this is being multiplied at extremely high speed. You've launched the new Climate Immersion Observatory, the Space Climate Observatory, with 20 nations. What's that about?
Yeah, so we launched that within the context of the One Planet Summit. It's an initiative led within this during this international summit. We started discussing to organize this international network, and it's been launched during the Paris Air Show last June. So there are 23.
And the purpose is?
The purpose is to modelize and to give operational tools to local territories and elected officials, cities or whatever, in order to have a very good idea of what will be the impact of climate change on their territory. And with using this satellite and this satellite data linked with local data, empirical data, in situ data, then we are able to modelize what's going to happen in the next few years within a specific territory. It can be linked with coastal erosion, it can be linked with water supply, or whatever topic we have, whatever problem we have. This international informal network, which our friends are actually member of, is proposing to put the data together and to share the data. That is very important.
So, Niklas, your committee, your super committee based in Vienna, at the United Nations, is involved in trying to push all this forward. The issue here is data to help us understand.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I would actually like to summarize here a holistic approach that we're working around. 4 pillars: space economy, space society, space accessibility, and space diplomacy. And to summarize those pillars, in a nutshell, space economy, there we are looking into what is the role of space technology and science and their applications at the national level for the national economy, and how can the national economy boost space activity in a country. Space society is the next step. That is, how are governments going to use space technology for societal growth? And that is one of the core parameters for national space activities. And then the question, space accessibility, what is needed? Well, research in space, going to space, sending astronauts, but also receiving and being able to process data from satellite platforms, what Laurence mentioned here, the Space Climate Observatory, the Earth observation data, global navigation satellite system data. All of that needs to be processed and be managed at the local level. And lastly, how is the international community going to foster international cooperation and coordination to achieve those goals at the national level? So those 4 pillars summarizes really what states, all states, whether they are spacefaring nations or whether they are emerging space nations, really need to discuss and come to a consensus around.
Do you have a problem, do you think, convincing people that space can provide answers and will provide answers to many of our sustainability issues?
Yeah, and I want to pick up a little bit what Laurence said here, because there is a perception that space is about planetary missions only. It's about space exploration. It's more or less very close to science fiction. But what we are discussing here is how to use these tools, space applications, science, technology, and their applications for the benefit of sustainability of planet Earth. This is really the core of space activities.
Your Excellency, you mentioned your mission to Mars, and before we came on the platform, I said, really? Yeah. And you then explained to me why going to Mars is so important for understanding, particularly in this region.
Well, actually, the Mars mission was a beginnery mission by UAE leadership in 2014. UAE wants to set, a good examples for this region through science and technology. Our leadership, were in search for, flagship project. Then Mars was their destination.
Yeah, but why Mars? What do you believe you need to know from Mars?
Well, this is the international scientific space community. They do believe that Mars is the best candidate for people to live. It's close to Earth. It's a rocket planet. And also, there are some challenges, but through space exploration, there might be solutions. But Mars is the best candidate from the planets around the sun to host human beings.
But you also said about the arid nature, where
yes.
a planet which had water, but doesn't anymore. In other words, we might be able to learn something there.
That's true, and this is the science behind our mission. Our mission has a scientific purpose, which is a spacecraft that will be launched this year to Mars to study the atmosphere of Mars. So basically, it's a weather satellite that will do upper and lower atmosphere of Mars to search, why Mars is a dry, cold planet. 4,000 years ago, or around that date, Mars was wet planet. And this is proven through the signature of water, still obvious, the geology configuration of Mars. So, but there's no water today. It's very cold. There is no atmosphere. Radiation is on the surface. So what happened to Mars? We will learn from that scientific data.
Are you fear that's what's going to happen on our planet?
I think so, because if you look to,
Really?
I mean, maybe not now, but I think down 3 or 4 years, 4,000 years.
3 or 4 years.
To be honest with you, unless we do something to protect our Earth, it's going to have the
Beyond
same fate.
2050.
Yes. So I think as a human being, if we really care about to keep our planet in good shape, just to keep the atmosphere. Atmosphere is what we call God gift to protect us. Now we don't have a spacesuit. Me and you, we can't go on the beach, without spacesuit. Why? Because the atmosphere is protecting Earth, keep the right temperature, keep the weather cycle, and also, keep the life and season living.
Right, all three of you. I need to understand, I think the audience do as well, what's the indispensability of the data that's up there? How valuable is it? There are probably experts in the audience as well, but for those who can't quite understand how the screening and the observatory, the observing of data and providing of data is critical for us understanding what is happening. Laurence.
Well, it's simply completely essential to understand, in the topic that concerns us today, the sustainability and climate change. You've read, everybody's probably read the last report from the IPCC. Well, IPCC's report on cryogenic and that just has been released in October is mainly based on modelization out of satellite data that you can have from on the pole, on the North Pole or whatever, observing the water cycle, for example. So when we are actually we have a program in France in cooperation with Germany about the composition of atmosphere and the methane that is within the atmosphere. We have it's called Merlin, and that's typically how to monitor and how to follow the greenhouse gas emissions around the world. So we have that. All those data we gather with satellite help us to understand the ecosystem, the water cycle, the carbon cycle. All of this is absolutely necessary for our knowledge and to be able to modelize the evolution of the climate.
Niklas.
Yeah.
Same question.
Yes.
The indispensability of this data, how valuable it is to all of us.
I was actually going to, I agree with Laurence, but I was also going to raise an issue here that, of course, the use of space data is one thing, but it cannot be only seen in isolation. We need also data from other technologies, and we need to create synergies with other areas of sustainability. So the space sector cannot work in isolation, and it is not. We are really trying to reach out to other sectors. One example, and this is not related to the use of data precisely, but disaster management. When there is flooding, volcano eruptions, all kinds of disasters, tsunamis, there is a program that we have built up in our office called UN Spider, where we try to go to countries and really have the various stakeholders on the ground to sit together. Because the space community, in dialogue with the disaster management community, have difficulties to talk. They don't speak the same language necessarily. But it's important to bring them together and to foster a dialogue at the national level. And this is really the benefit of the space community working together with other communities. Because if we don't do that, if we don't create synergies, we would probably fail in the end.
Your Excellency, what data do you rely on here in Abu Dhabi, and what across the 14 Arab countries in your expanding union on the Space Agency? What are you learning from space at the moment, which you wouldn't otherwise get?
I think, especially in our region, the most need for space data, because it's a widely desert. We have a lack of shortage in water, shortage in food. We have a lot of people living in this region, so we need to explore where are the resources, the natural resources. That can be, space can help. So we are now taking initiative in UAE to start Arab Space Cooperation. It's an initiative by UAE, and now it's 14 countries. This year, in 2019, actually, last year it was established, and we think more countries will join. UAE, after establishing this Arab Space Cooperation, funded the first Arab satellites. It's a satellite funded by UAE to serve, the Arab region. It's a remote sensing satellite, hyperspectral sensor that will identify, and try to solve, some of the challenges in climate change and the environment, but also to help identify potential natural resources for the region. It will help, farmers. It will help, people who want to plan a new city, new roads. So I think space will bring great benefits especially to this region, beside of what's been said from Laurence and Niklas.
Could I now talk about the practical and political risks? We've all enjoyed the internet. Now look at the problem with cybersecurity. We've always looked at the positives. Look at the bank fraud and financial insecurity. Let me put to all of you the problem of actually bringing countries together to agree. There are national security issues here, not least the fact that satellites and so on are seen as spies. And we're beginning to see already the fragmenting of the international treaties and the international community in so many areas. How much of these technical and, if you like, idealistic aspirations going to be conditioned and limited by real nationalistic concerns of certain governments? Don't you dare look at our country. We don't want to share that data either. Niklas, you have to adjudicate this.
Yes, absolutely. And you are right. And this is a concern that we all have. But I want to point out one aspect here. If you look at the major spacefaring nations, they pretty much share the same concern and the challenges from threats of activities, and I would say threats to space assets in orbit. So if you do an attack in space, you could pretty much be sure that you would be harmed yourself. Because whatever you do in harming a space asset, that action will create space debris.
I was meaning as well the sharing of data, not attacking the system. In other words, I as a national government do not want that data shared because it's actually national security of water, etc.
Yeah, and that is something we live with, of course. We live with that fact.
Do you expect it to become an even bigger problem?
I actually don't know. But when you mention, I mean, data and all with protection of space assets and signals, you also have the really emerging issue of cybersecurity, which is also of concern to the space sector, because the signals of satellites can be exposed to attacks via cyber.
I think what I'm trying to get at is the resilience of a community and a country with water, sanitation, cities and so on is actually an issue of national security.
Yeah, absolutely. It is. And critical infrastructures on the ground and also space systems is something that, of course, countries regard as part of their national security.
Laurence, I see you disagreeing with me.
Yeah, I'm not sure I completely disagree. What I'm saying
I'm just asking the question, really.
Yeah, not necessarily completely. What I'm saying is that behind every space agency in the world, there is a strong scientific community. There are strong scientific communities. Scientists all around the world have this value, international value, of sharing their knowledge among peers and sharing their data, their research data. Of course, there are limitations that, of course, there are security issues behind that. But concerning environmental and climate issues, cooperation is stronger now than ever. And the Group on Earth Observation, which is the international body that have within them all the scientific community, scientific and academics interested by Earth observation, are really pushing towards this sharing of data. And that's why we are backed up within this Space Climate Observatory initiative. We are backed up with this strong community, which is saying, hello, climate change and environmental issues are Earth problems. They are worldwide. They concern everyone. We need to put our efforts together and share our data. There are limitations to that, be it not only security issues, also business issues, because all this is incapacitated with by business involvement. Though there are limitations to that, but we are strongly pushed towards sharing.
The reason I say that, of course, I'll come to you in a moment, Your Excellency. The reason I'm saying that is that there's very clear evidence from NATO, which is obviously a security operation among 29 nations in Europe, including North America, of course, currently, that when it comes to threats against countries, there has not been a willingness to share intelligence. And therefore, data, which is seen as vital for humanity, could be held back. I'm being the kind of skeptic here, because there is already evidence that having an international treaty does not guarantee the sharing. Niklas?
Yeah, no, you're right. And of course, we are here inherently using, it's a dual use area we're discussing here. Space is maybe the most dual use in human history. And of course, the space community, I would imagine, has been living with this duality for so many years, for half a century. So it is built in also a capacity of dealing with space in a civilian context, for peaceful purposes of outer space, and then also securing national security concerns. I'm not so, I would say, concerned as you are.
I'm not concerned. I'm asking the question in the expectation that it's actually being discussed at least. And you see nations who disagree at times in your committee.
Yes, we do, of course. Yeah.
Your Excellency, most of the time, the Excellency says.
I think I will look to this from the other angle. As an emerging space nation, I think, export control, limitation on data sharing is a driver for countries to go and establish space programs. And now this is where you see race to space. In reality, there is now more than 60 countries, probably 70. They have space programs compared to 50 years ago. There is 2 nations that they have space, programs or capability. I think limitations will be there. Export control will be there. One of the initiatives, the Space Climate Observatory, is how to get around this, how to encourage countries to share, data for the human, crisis or emergency crisis. But I think nationally, there will be limitations on data. And I think we have to live with this, as Niklas mentioned. Because
you make one point, Laurence, which is important, that some of what we take for granted, some of the data, can only be provided now from space.
Yeah, absolutely. We have I didn't mention, but we have in Europe this fantastic program which actually benefit to the whole of humanity, which is called Copernicus. Copernicus is a series of constellation for Earth observation, dealing with all type of topics, going from natural disaster to ocean monitoring to Earth observation. So it's very wide, and it's financed by the European Commission, financed by, let's say, European citizens. And all these data are completely opened. I put aside the security, of course, the security program within this, but all these data are open to everyone, and you can access them on platform, and it is widely used, even by by Google, Amazon, or whatever. Everybody's using those data. So it is also a position we have in Europe, saying we know we are working for, mankind.
Niklas, there are other points you wanted to make, particularly about the increased dialogue with the private sector, and also organized reporting on the implementation of international guidelines.
Yeah.
In other words, how strong are these international guidelines, and why the private sector?
Yeah. First of all, we have 5 space treaties. They were formed in the past. There is no appetite, no consensus today to form new treaties on outer space activities. So this intergovernmental body I'm working for, we are now looking into voluntary, non-legally binding guidelines, because if countries buy into that, the chance is higher that they would feel committed than a treaty which is not really supported by major spacefaring nations. So those guidelines are very interesting because they deal really with the future of the safety of space operations. Actions we need to take internationally to curb the proliferation of space debris, which is really the problem for space operations.
But let me ask you, maybe I'm just the resident skeptic up here on the platform, but hopefully I'm being pragmatic as well. Yeah. Look, in the last couple of years, we've had the Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty, torn apart, the INF Treaty, Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty, and we've had the Americans saying they want to get rid of the Open Skies Convention as well. I'm saying, therefore, that treaties are great as long as there's faith in them. And look what's happening to the JCPOA in Iran. Is that a practical concern you have to have?
Of course it is a concern. It is a concern. It is an inherent concern because we are all striving for treaty. Legally binding treaties is the ultimate way of committing states. Okay, that is one fact. But if that is not possible, we have to step down and take the second best option, and that is to form guidelines that would be widely accepted, in particular by the major spacefaring nations, because then they voluntarily commit to those guidelines and they develop them.
Laurence, and finally, we've got a couple of minutes left. Is there a sufficient momentum politically and technologically to make sure, to guarantee really, that what we're talking about up here on the platform is going to endure and provide much more data, much more information, and a significant benefit in this battle on sustainability?
Well, nothing is endured forever, but well, we can say that we have seen recently an extremely strong involvement of the nations towards space. I mean, the last ESA conference allowed an enormous budget, which was to the sustainability of activities in space at the European level. We have seen exactly the same thing in the US and in many countries, as His Excellency has mentioned. They're willing all over the world, from the country, to engage in space. So I think we can be, I mean, somehow confident, and especially in the area of environment and climate change.
Your Excellency, confident?
We are confident about what we try to do. We are very excited, but I think space will be always crucial for sustainability on Earth. But again, I agree that we need to keep space sustainable. And space debris is one. Now we are proud that we are working with the United Nations Outer Space Office, Niklas, team to establish an office here in UAE to promote awarenesses, how important to keep space safe and sustainable.
Niklas, your final thought.
Yes, and I would like to just to say what His Excellency mentioned here. We will set up an office here in UAE, and we will focus on space sustainability. Sustainability from space, sustainability in space.
Good. Well, thank you all very much indeed. And we look forward to being optimistic. All I can do is make sure that we have a qualified assessment of some of the challenges which are certainly being thrown up by what in our project we're calling unthinkables, which are actually really unpalatables. There are looming challenges which many don't really want to see at the moment. But can I thank you all very much indeed? Thank you.